Hello again, welcome to week 7 of our online classes that I've been running for you, and thank you for all the hard work you've been doing and for the wonderful bird pictures that you've all been posting on the Facebook group. Really enjoyed seeing those, and I'll be putting those online nearer next Wednesday. So what we'll be doing this week is we're going to think about and look at animals, but in particular we're going to be thinking about our pets, because during this time of lockdown, while we're all stuck indoors, one of the things that has cheered me up no end is having our dog Scout around, and being able to go out for a walk once a day and have a cuddle at night, and everything like that. The dog really cheers us up. So I know how much people really love their pets and animals. So this week our class is called Big Cats and Little Dogs, because I'd like you to have the flexibility to choose some more outlandish and exotic animals as well. There is a program on Netflix, I believe, where this man actually keeps tigers and lions and things as pets, which is totally weird. But the idea being that we are looking at pets today or this week. Okay, so this week what I've chosen to use is I'm using some Parker Quink ink, which is this stuff, to do a ink drawing, a brush and ink drawing of a dog, a very beautiful and lovely dog, which I'll show you right now. I'm calling him Herman. And just looking at this picture really just makes me feel kind of happy already. That dog is just like a happy chappy, isn't he? So I've used ink and water only to paint this picture or draw this picture using one or two brushes. Round brushes are quite good because you get the flexibility and the movement of the brush strokes and things like that within there, and you can look very closely at the tiny little hairs and details and things. So here's the picture. Ta-da! So he could do with perhaps a little bit more tone and shadow, and he's got lovely massive ears and a beautiful expression, but I had a lot of fun today painting that in preparation for today's lesson. Okay, so you'll be able to see me on the video that I'm going to put on in a few moments, and you'll be able to see how it works. But basically you use the ink to water it down to make it darker and lighten it up. Water it down to make it lighter, and when you want it dark, obviously you use it pure, straight from the Quink ink bottle. Now, if you don't have any Quink ink or you don't have any inks, you could perhaps use watercolor, which is quite good. You could use acrylic paint and just water that down as you go along as well. So obviously these things dry differently in a different medium, but it can be a lot of fun just to sort of play around with these things. Okay, so let's have a little look at what we're doing today and have a go at drawing cats and dogs. Here we go. So here we go. So I started off just here. You can see our little lovely dog up in the top corner there, and you can see me holding the original photograph, which I actually found by doing a search on the internet, and I couldn't resist drawing this dog because he just made me laugh a little bit, which is what we all need, isn't it, right now? So anyway, I've started out by just working out where I want the whole of the head to go by drawing this kind of circular shape, because he's got a kind of a round head, hasn't he? And then obviously you can see I've put in a rough placing of the ears, and I've made a few adjustments as I've gone along. And you can see me measuring the proportions of the face using my pencil again, as I've done in previous lessons. So it's important just to have this little bit of freedom, like I've said every week, just to sort of sketch things out and get all the outlines in so that you can then go confidently into using whatever media that you've chosen. I really like this dog's eyes. I like the reflections in it, and I like the nice dark shadows around his mouth and all those sorts of things that you can see in this picture. And then on top of that, the lovely detail and the highlights in there as well. So my intention a bit later on was to use a highlighting like a white pen to put some highlights in, but in the end I found that I didn't really need or want to do that. Looking at my final picture up there on the right hand side, you can see there's probably a bit more of an opportunity to add a few more shadows and things in, but largely I'm pretty happy with it. So I'm moving down the face. This is a great face to do because it's got lots of wonderful outlines and shapes in there that you can put in. And that obviously helps you to map the shape of the face as well. So a lovely way to begin today's piece of work. And I also really love this bow tie that he's got on around his neck as well. Right, so for the next minute or so I'm afraid you have to see my hair again. But I just do zoom in a few minutes so you'll be able to see a bit closer up some of the details that I'm working on. But basically at the moment what I'm doing is sketching out, I've started to work on the eye, around the eye area on the left hand side of the drawing, and you can see that on my portrait up there at the top. There we go, you just saw it then. So the nice thing about using inks is that you don't need much, you just need your ink, which is a Parker Quink ink, which is fantastic stuff. It is quite expensive, I think, to buy in bottles nowadays, but when you do, it's quite a flexible medium because you can actually use a little bit of bleach if you want to take out some of the dark areas. You can actually paint an area with Quink ink and then use a brush and a bit of bleach, and it will, when it's dry, it will take out quite precise marks. So it's a lovely medium to use, and like I was saying, the nice thing about using ink is that all you need, in this case anyway, is a brush. So I'm using quite a small round brush here at the moment, and a plate to just put on your ink. I put pure ink on the plate at first, then I add a bit of water to get it to the right tone. So I'm using a lot of line actually when I do this, because there's lots of detail on top of his on his fur and around his nose and all this sort of thing. So I can actually build up a lot of the tone and shadow just by doing very small dashes and little marks and things like that, and that really starts to bring out the texture but also the shadow. Well, the other thing you can do, of course, is you can use a slightly bigger brush and you can put larger areas of tone down over larger areas of the picture, let those dry, and then go back in with the detail as well. But I actually found it quite a lot of fun to do this particular drawing by doing lots of very small marks. You can see on the bow tie up there on the finished one that there is much more larger areas of washes of colour of the ink over the tie, as opposed to lots of very small marks on his face. So there are different ways of using the ink to get different effects and things. But now look, you can see how I'm using lots of very small brush strokes just to fill in some of the detail and things that are on his face. So lots of bits of fur and all that sort of thing. This was quite a nice drawing because you've got the lightness of his fur on the photo, that is, got the lightness of his fur, and you've got the darkness around his features, such as the eyes where I'm working at the moment, and inside of his mouth, under his chin, and then it just gives you the opportunity to maybe mix a lighter tone quite quickly
so that then you can add some of those light details using similar techniques such as dashes, dots, stipples, and strokes. So here you can see again that I've gone straight into the darker areas of the picture, because that just helps you look at the shapes and the structure of the nose or whatever it is you're drawing. It can't be underestimated though, can it? I mean, if you're not an animal sort of person, then you might not understand as well as some people that animals just provide such a great level of comfort, actually. In fact, our dog that we got, Scout, we got during a time, or just after a time when I was having some difficulties of my own at work and things, and I needed a break, and I'd always wanted a dog, so we decided it was high time we went out and got one, because they just make, they make home even more of a home, really. And the great thing about a dog is you come through the door and the dog is extremely happy and excited to see you every single time. They just give you so much love, don't they, dogs? And they're always there. They truly are a great friend. So I'm working in around the base of the mouth, or just inside of his jowls up there. And the other thing I found about the ink when I was working with it is, it kind of has, you put your black in, you think that's black, but then after a while, as the ink dries, you think, I want it blacker, so I go back over it again and darken it down again to really get that depth of contrast in different areas of the picture. And it's particularly nice putting in the highlights on his eyes. I always love doing that bit because it really brings those eyes to life, actually. So you can see me doing little sort of stipples and building up the tone and shadow using those marks, and not just painting in a big broad brush stroke for those bits. And once you've got those marks in, you also need to look generally over the whole image to see where there are lighter areas and darker areas even within those marks. So if you look at his nose, if you look at the tone and shadow in his nose and the side of his mouth, you can see how it's kind of highlighted on the front of his face. As you go down the sides, it gets a little bit darker, and that brings his nose forward and his mouth sort of curving inwards and slightly away. So you need to look over the whole of the picture to get those tones and shadows in. Yeah, I did spend a little bit of more time than I normally would on this. Spent about an hour and a half making this drawing. I was listening to podcasts, to be honest, and just really relaxing and enjoying myself. Usually I like to spend perhaps about an hour preparing these drawings for everybody in the art class, but when you're listening to a podcast, a comedy or something like that, you just lose yourself, which is always really rewarding, because you just relax, don't you? So one of the bits that I thought might be a bit more difficult to illustrate for this drawing is his tongue, because he's got his tongue sort of up in the roof of his mouth and curled around at the end. So it's not like a lot of dogs you see, the tongue sort of lolling out everywhere. He's kind of doing that thing these types of dogs do, which is like make that kind of grunting, breathing noise, I guess. So the tongue has got a very different sort of texture to it compared to the skin or the furry areas around the mouth, in that it's smooth. But the important thing to remember is that it isn't just white, it's got kind of a tone to it as well, even though it looks a lot lighter, and there's no stippling on there. It's just a case of adding planes of dark and light shadows in order to make it kind of a smooth shape that stands out well enough against the textured areas. It was quite nice putting these teeth in as well. Quite a distinctive feature on his mouth. So the important thing here was to maybe even just exaggerate more than in the actual photo the tones and shadows around the white teeth to help them pick out a little bit more. But certainly all round this was such an enjoyable picture to do, and the nice thing was once I'd sketched it out in this way, I could be quite confident about where everything goes. I suppose one of the things that I always you have to be very vigilant about is the placing of the eyes, because if you get the eye too high, too low, slightly too big or whatever, then what you end up with is a picture that doesn't look quite right. So that was one of the things I was watching out for. I do think that my picture is just a little bit wider than the photo, but I'm quite happy with it anyway. So just getting in the highlights and the tones and shadows together. Another little thing that I quite enjoyed noticing was the highlight just around the top of his mouth above the teeth. There's little highlights above there as well, which just sort of outline part of the face a little bit too. So this would have been a studio photograph. So it's done in artificial light, so it's nicely lit to show the features in a nice clear and crisp way. Any other photos you find of animals may not be lit in this way, of course, because the light would be coming from one or the other directions and casting a heavier shadow. So that in itself can be quite interesting, because you end up creating a lot of the nice effects of lighting and things, and there are lots of tones and shadows that you can draw into the picture to help things stand out a little bit more. So it's a little bit obviously different, but this was just really nice to do. It's a lovely photo. I couldn't resist doing it when I saw it. I thought I've got to do that because it'll be a lot of fun. So there is a little area that I think, now looking at this picture, I could probably have another little work on, and that is on the right hand side. There's just above the bow tie, there's quite a light area which I'd probably tone down a little bit in order to send that that little area back and help bring the tie out, the bow tie out. I'm not too worried about it now, but that's probably what I would do to improve this piece. It's quite nice doing the ears as well, because I didn't have to spend too much longer on there, because I wanted you to look at the face. So it more of an indication of where the ears are was more relevant than painting it too heavily. So thinking about where you want your viewer to actually look and they see your picture is just as important. So you may decide to leave some areas less painted than others in order to draw attention to certain parts of the image. So there you go. Have a little go at drawing a dog or an animal that you love. Bye.